direct from the Blue Lotus Temple in Bothell, where they practice and teach meditation and yoga. And today they're going to be doing, of course, a tribute to Martin Luther King and Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi. And they'll touch on the kind of deeper spiritual aspects of their lives and their legacy. So without further ado, let's welcome Ananda Swami.
The program tonight is self-evident and self-explanatory, but in reviewing the program in preparation for this, I wanted to share the simple fact in today's culture, today's society, when fewer and fewer people were alive during that period of time of the civil rights movement in America, even fewer still, of course, during the life of Gandhi. But the relevance of their lives, their message, is ever more completely relevant to all of us. Doesn't mean we have to go out and march necessarily, although perhaps. It doesn't mean that we're going to be a Mahatma, but nonetheless, the understanding these men and others have given to this new world of ours for the future, a way by which the conflicts inherent on the planet today, as we become more connected, can be resolved by nonviolent means. And violence is an expensive proposition, and I don't mean the monetary aspects of it. So as we listen to the words and so forth of this program, it's important for us, or at least we have the opportunity, to internalize the message as being the change that we seek, yes, absolutely, and also understanding that social justice, equality, doesn't come without personal sacrifice. That's the law of change, if you will. And what our particular and personal role may be in that, of course, is personal. But nonetheless, it doesn't come through legislation or through funding and money. It comes through people who make those changes, but also who make some level of sacrifice in their lives. The second part of the message, perhaps dominant in the program itself, and therefore shouldn't need much more explanation, is the simple fact that real change comes through the descent of a higher power, through which we open ourselves to be channels to something greater than our ego, something greater than ourselves. So without any further, let's begin.
my soul in freedom, nothing to fear anymore. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing to fear anymore. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul in freedom. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing to fear anymore. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing to fear anymore. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul in freedom. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing to fear anymore. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing to fear anymore. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul in freedom. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing to fear anymore. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing to fear anymore. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing to fear anymore. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing to fear anymore. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul in freedom, nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul in freedom.
We are here this evening to honor and celebrate the lives of two extraordinary men. Extraordinary for the universality of their ideals, and extraordinary for the courage they displayed in standing by those ideals. Their efforts met with stiff opposition and violence. While they were firm in their non-cooperation with injustice, they nonetheless offered love and respect in return for the violence and hate of their self-styled opponents.
Gandhi and King were deeply committed to their respective faith traditions, and yet possessed a remarkable maturity in their acceptance and respect for all faiths. Each possessed the understanding that at the heart of all creation stands one truth. This magnanimity of heart extended naturally to embrace all races and all nations as their own.
Gandhi and King understood that the freedom that they fought for came with the concomitant responsibility to be the change that they sought in others. Thus, to demand respect from others required them to give respect to others. They taught that freedom is not doing what you please, but doing what is right.
Gandhi and King never met each other. At the time of Gandhi's death in 1948, King's life work to lead the civil rights movement had not yet taken shape. But these two men had a great deal in common. The baton of Gandhi's life work was to be passed to Dr. King, and from King to many others, such as Nelson Mandela in South Africa, where incidentally Gandhi had first begun his life's work. Dr. King studied Gandhi and his methods extensively. To that end, he traveled to India in 1959 as the guest of Prime Minister Nehru, Gandhi's successor, to learn more about the remarkable man who had secured India's independence from Britain using strategies and tactics that had never before in history been deployed on such a vast scale.
An interesting footnote to the life of Mahatma Gandhi can be found in the widely read classic autobiography of a yogi, the life story of Paramhansa Yogananda, whose teachings are the inspiration for Ananda. Paramhansa Yogananda visited Gandhi in 1935 on his only trip back to India since taking up residence in America in 1920. At Gandhi's ashram near Wardha, India, Yogananda initiated Mahatma Gandhi and his close followers into the meditation technique of Kriya Yoga.
Gandhi and King were not just idealists. Each displayed an intimate knowledge of law, politics, and human nature. Both were highly educated, articulate intellectuals, and yet, at the same time, charismatic leaders, speakers, and writers who identified strongly with those whose sufferings they sought to alleviate. No detail of their campaigns escaped their interest.
What set these men apart from most politicians and reformers of the 20th century was their inner life of prayer and meditation, from which they derived a heroic willingness to do what they perceived to be God's will. Though each was burdened and at times paralyzed with guilt born of their own human shortcomings, each shouldered on with faith in the righteousness of the cause to which they had given the full measure of their lives.
Each had come to terms with the likelihood that the ultimate sacrifice would be asked of them. And indeed, in due course, each died from the bullet of an assassin. The fullness of their life and their message to humanity was nothing less than a call to personal transformation, inspired by faith and hallowed by divine grace.
It is this message of personal transformation that applies to us here today. While you and I are not likely to become a Mahatma, we can each strive to guide the nation of our own mental and moral citizens. And just as surely, our example will spread to those around us. Whether a Mahatma or a mom, the secret of happiness and the secret of success in life are one and the same. Harmony with truth and unconditional love.
The music we will share with you in this program has been composed by Swami Kriyananda, founder of Ananda and direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda.
If you're seeking freedom in a revolution, oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For once the guns stop blazing, you'll find it amazing how the world can drag on just as before.
If you're seeking freedom in a marble mansion, oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there.
For even when it's sunny, you'll be counting money, keeping up that showcase your face lined with care. And if you're seeking freedom on a throne of power, oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For though men all obey you, what if they betray you? Tense you'll be and waiting for foes everywhere.
And if you're seeking freedom, cast away desire.
And if you're seeking freedom, seek it on the mountains, the sunlight on your shoulders, the wind in your hair. For there's no one can hold you, boss about or mold you. Once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere. For once your heart is free, boss about or mold you. Once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere.
The object of this massive tribute died as he had always lived, a private man, without wealth, without property, without official title or office. Mahatma Gandhi was not the commander of armies nor a ruler of vast lands. He could not boast any scientific achievement or artistic gift. Yet men, governments, dignitaries from all over the world have joined hands today to pay homage to this little brown man in the loincloth who led his country to freedom. In the words of General George C. Marshall, the American Secretary of State, Mahatma Gandhi has become the spokesman for the conscience of all mankind. He was a man who made humility and simple truth more powerful than empires. And Albert Einstein added, generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this, ever in flesh and blood, walked upon this earth.
Mohandas Gandhi was born on October 2nd, 1869 in Porbandar, India. He left India in 1888 to study law in London. In 1893, he went to do legal work in South Africa, which was then also a British colony. He remained there for 21 years, working to correct the unjust and inhumane treatment of ethnic Indians. It was during this time that he established what he called Satyagraha, a non-violent method of direct social action based on spiritual principles and personal discipline. It is the basis for passive resistance or non-violent non-cooperation.
Gandhi returned to India in 1915, and it wasn't long before he had become the leader of the Indian nationalist movement. Over the years, he spent a total of 7 years in prison for his political activities, often fasting to emphasize his commitment through personal self-sacrifice. In 1947, when, at last, independence from Britain was in sight, it became clear that, to Gandhi's dismay, the country was going to be partitioned into Hindu and Muslim states, India and Pakistan. Gandhi believed that only a united India would offer hope to heal the wounds and fears aroused by years of divisive political leadership leading to independence. But a united India was not to be. Immediately, mass rioting and mass migrations between the two newly formed countries ensued.
Gandhi, now 78, vowed to fast until the bloodshed ceased. After 5 days, the opposing leaders pledged to stop the fighting, and Gandhi broke his fast. But 12 days later, he was assassinated by a Hindu fanatic. Gandhi's last words were addressed to God, Hey Ram.
Gandhi worked tirelessly, not just for political independence for India, but for social equality, for women, and for the untouchables of India, for better working conditions, and for more just terms for tenant farmers. He began a nationwide homespun cloth spinning campaign so that Indians could once again, with dignity, make their own clothes and not have to import cloth from Britain. He lobbied against unfair taxes, as in the now famous March to the Sea, to protect the tax on salt. India honors him today not only as the father of its nationhood, but also as a Mahatma, great soul.
We switch now to reading quotations from his talks and writings.
Where there is love, there is life. Hatred leads to destruction. We must widen the circle of our love till the scope of our love becomes coterminous with the whole world. The forms are many, but informing spirit is one. The final goal of all life is to realize this essential oneness.
Pandit Nehru, Gandhi's protege, once asked his mentor, Gandhiji, what do you see will be the impact on the world of India's liberation from Britain?
Through the deliverance of India, I seek to deliver the so-called weaker races of the earth from the crushing heels of Western exploitation.
An American visitor to Gandhi's ashram asked him, Mr. Gandhi, what message do you have for America? Gandhi paused, as if peering into the future when America would discover the need for a more sustainable lifestyle, and then replied,
My message to America is simply the hum of the spinning wheel. It is to me the substitute for the power of weapons. For it brings the message of self-reliance and hope to the millions of India. A century ago, every cottage was able to replenish its resources by means of the spinning wheel. But now, that has all but died away.
To teeming millions in India, as illustrated by scenes filmed in 1931, he was a supreme leader and revered as a saint. Mahatma Gandhi acclaimed upon his release from prison. He was jailed repeatedly by the British authorities for agitating non-violent resistance to the British rule. A London-trained lawyer who reverted to Hindu tradition, he rallied the vast masses of Hindus to the cause of Indian independence. Acclaimed in Europe, Gandhi a world figure. Here in France, crowds thronged around the little brown man in his simple garb of Oriental humility. He was an exceedingly human figure, genial, shrewd in dealing with people and politics, the spiritual leader and mystic of India. In England, for a roundtable conference on Indian independence that failed, there were popular demonstrations for the world-famous opponent of British rule in India, and a Gandhi message for English children.
You are going to tell the other children that I love you all as my own children. That's all I want to say.
Gandhi's long years of labor were crowned by success. India independence won. The treaty making, with the Mahatma the dominant influence behind the scenes. Triumph and tragedy. Hindu-Muslim feud. And now Gandhi goes on a pilgrimage pleading for peace. All his life he has preached nonviolence, And now Indian independence, his own great cause, has been followed by murderous violence. Striving for peace, he goes on his 15th and final fast. His weapons always were fasting, prayer, and penance. Then his doom. In the garden here at New Delhi, shot by a Hindu fanatic demanding war with Muslims. The tragedy of Gandhi, a figure the world knew so well.
Gandhi also had a wonderful sense of humor. In a mock apology, he once said,
I have been known as a crank, a faddist, and a madman. Evidently, the reputation is well-deserved. For wherever I go, I draw to myself cranks, faddists, and madmen.
And there is also this gem. A reporter once asked, "What do you think of Western civilization?" Gandhi replied,
I think it would be a good idea.
Mahatma Gandhi popularized the term ahimsa, a Sanskrit term meaning nonviolence. He wrote, "Nonviolence is the law of our species, just as violence is the law of the brood. The spirit lies dormant in the brood. He knows no law but that of physical might. But the dignity of man requires obedience to a higher law, to the strength of the spirit."
Ahimsa means that we must meet the greatest enmity with an equal measure of ahimsa towards abatement. Fearlessness is the first requisite of spirituality. Cowards can never be moral.
The only tyrant I accept in this world is the still, small voice within.
To forget how to dig the earth and tend the soil is to forget ourselves.
Democracy, disciplined and enlightened, is the finest thing in the world. My notion of democracy is that under it, the weakest should have the same opportunity as the strongest. The spirit of democracy cannot be established in the midst of terrorism, whether governmental or popular.
The spirit of democracy requires a change of heart. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people cannot be conducted at the bidding of one man, however great he may be. Liberty never meant the license to do anything at will.
What I want the people of India to understand is the message of Asia. It is the message of love and the message of truth. It is this age of democracy, in this age of awakening of the poorest of the poor, you can re-deliver this message that the wise men of the East have left to us. If we really become worthy of that great message, the conquest of the West with understanding and love will be completed. This conquest will be welcomed by the West. The West is pining for wisdom. It is despairing of the proliferation of the atom bombs. It is up to you to bring the message of Asia to the world. That is the heritage your teachers and my teachers have taught Asia.
At the shrine in Delhi, where he was assassinated, pilgrims gathered each dawn to chant the ancient Upanishadic prayer that Gandhi loved best. Lead us from untruth to truth, from darkness to light, from death to immortality.
Thy light within us shining has shown where freedom lies. From earthly walls
King Jr. was 19 years old in 1948, the year Gandhi was killed. Dr. King described segregation during his youth in these words: "There was a strict system of segregation when I was growing up in Atlanta. For a long, long time, I could not go swimming until there was a Negro YMCA. A Negro child in Atlanta could not go to any public park. I could not go to the so-called white schools. In many of the stores downtown, I couldn't go to a lunch counter to buy a cup of coffee. I could not attend any of the theaters. There were 1 or 2 Negro theaters, but they didn't get any of the first-run pictures, or if they did, it would be 2 or 3 years later. In high school, I took the bus across town to a Negro high school. Negroes had to sit in the back of the public buses, even having to stand when there were empty seats, because those seats were reserved for the whites. Every time I got on the bus, I left my mind up on the front seat, saying to myself, one of these days I'm going to put my body up there where my mind is."
In 1948, the year that Martin graduated at the top of his class at Morehouse College in Atlanta, he met and married Coretta Scott, and by 1954 he was the minister of his own church in Montgomery, Alabama. It was here, a year later, that Rosa Parks, a black woman, defied local law and refused to give up her seat to a bus to a white man.
The very next day, Dr. King teamed up with Reverend Ralph Abernathy and others to organize the Montgomery bus boycott that launched the civil rights movement. For the next 13 years, Dr. King would use these and other tactics to educate, organize, lead, and inspire his people and people everywhere in the struggle against exploitation, injustice, and prejudice. He was revered throughout the world and was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. His assassination on April 4th, 1968 marked the end of an era, but his spirit marches on. His legacy is not limited to the civil rights movement in America. It is for all races and nations.
Confronted a foe to defend what is holy, to defend what is true. Our Lord on mankind did this duty bestow. Glad all our children who people these hills, glad in the vision their hearts understand what became of past struggles. Now the records are still, but courage still lingers, giving strength to our land. Men hunger for riches, for power, and for fame. By favor they think they will grow. The battles they fight, the victories they win, are never the victories they know. Men hunger for riches, for power, and for fame. By favor they think they will grow. The battles they
turn to reading excerpts from the writings and speeches of Dr. King himself.
One Sunday afternoon in the spring of 1950, during my time at Crozier Theological Seminary, I traveled to Philadelphia to hear a sermon by Dr. Mordecai Johnson, the first African-American president of Howard University. He had just returned from a trip to India. To my great interest, he spoke of the life and teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. His message was so profound and electrifying that I left the meeting and bought half a dozen books on Gandhi's life and works.
As I delved deeper into the philosophy of Gandhi, I came to see that the Christian doctrine of love, operating through the Gandhian method of nonviolence, is one of the most potent weapons available to an oppressed people in their struggle for freedom.
I was particularly struck by Gandhi's words, "Through our pain, we will make them see their injustice." Gandhi was inevitable. If humanity is to progress, Gandhi is inescapable. He lived, thought, acted, inspired by the vision of humanity evolving toward a world of peace and harmony. We may ignore him at our own risk.
The destiny of the United States is tied up with the destiny of India. India is a tremendous force for peace and nonviolence, at home and abroad. It is a land where the idealist and the intellectual are yet respected.
When Dr. King visited India in 1959, he was invited to address the nation on All India Radio. Here's an excerpt of Dr. King's remarks.
Leaders in and out of government, organizations, particularly the Gandhi Smarak Nidhi and the Quaker Center, and many homes and families have done their utmost to make our short stay both pleasant and instructive. We have learned a lot. We are not rash enough to presume that we know India, vast subcontinent with all of its people, problems, contrasts, and achievements. However, since we have been asked about our impressions, we venture one or two generalizations. First, we think that the spirit of Gandhi is much stronger today than some people believe. That is not only the direct and indirect influence of his comrades and associates, but also the organized efforts that are being made to preserve the Mahatma's letters and other writings, the pictures, monuments, the work of the Gandhi Smarak Nidhi and the movement led by the Saint Vinoba Bhave. These are but a few examples of the way Gandhiji will be permanently enshrined in the hearts of the people of India. Moreover, many governmental officials who do not follow Gandhi literally apply his spirit to domestic and international problems. Secondly, I wish to make a plea to the people and government of India. The issue of world peace is so critical that I feel compelled to offer a suggestion that came to me during the course of our conversations with Vinoba Bhave. The peace-loving peoples of the world have not yet succeeded in persuading my own country, America, and Soviet Russia to eliminate fear and disarm themselves. Unfortunately, as yet America and the Soviet Union have not shown the faith and moral courage to do this. Vinobaji has said that India or any other nation that has the faith and moral courage could disarm itself tomorrow, even unilaterally. It may be that just as India had to take the lead and show the world that national independence could be achieved non-violently, so India may have to take the lead and call for universal disarmament. And if no other nation will join her immediately, India may declare itself for disarmament unilaterally. Such an act of courage would be a great demonstration of the spirit of the Mahatma and would be the greatest stimulus to the rest of the world to do likewise. Moreover, any nation that would take such a brave step would automatically draw to itself the support of the multitudes of the earth, so that any would-be aggressor would be discouraged from risking the wrath of mankind. May I also say that since being in India, I am more convinced than ever before that the method of non-violent resistance is the most potent weapon available to oppress people in their struggle for justice and human dignity. In a real sense, Mahatma Gandhi embodied in his life certain universal principles that are inherent in the moral structure of the universe. These principles are as inescapable as the law of gravitation. Many years ago, when Abraham Lincoln was shot, and incidentally he was shot for the same reason that Mahatma Gandhi was shot for, namely for committing the crime of wanting to heal the wounds of a divided nation. And when he was shot, Secretary Stanton stood by the dead body of the great leader and said these words, "Now he belongs to the ages." And in a real sense, we can say the same thing about Mahatma Gandhi, and even in stronger terms. Now he belongs to the ages. And if this age is to survive, it must follow the way of love and nonviolence that he so nobly illustrated in his life. And Mahatma Gandhi may well be God's appeal to this generation, a generation drifting again to its doom. This eternal appeal is in the form of a warning. They that live by the sword shall perish by the sword. We must come to see in the world today that what he taught and his method throughout revealed to us that there is an alternative to violence, and that if we fail to follow this, we will perish in our individual and in our collective lives. For in a day when Sputniks and explorers dash through outer space and guided ballistic missiles are carving highways of death through the stratosphere, no nation can win a war. Today we no longer have a choice between violence and non-violence. It is either non-violence or non-existence.
Let us begin then this segment, reading excerpts from the prelude to the book by Stephen Oakes entitled, Let the Trumpet Sound, The Life of Martin Luther King, Jr.
Martin Luther King, Jr. perceived that the civil rights movement was an extension of the Civil War, and that Negroes of his day were striving to realize the promise of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. King did more than any other leader in his generation to help make emancipation a political and social fact in the racially troubled South. King also mounted a personal crusade to convert President John F. Kennedy into a modern Lincoln in the theater of civil rights, only to become another Lincoln himself. In the end, King fell in Memphis, Tennessee, a victim of the same conflict over racial tensions and national destiny that had claimed Lincoln's life in another April long before.
King's achievements were nothing less than astounding for a man who was cut down at the age of only 39 and who labored under staggering odds. Not only the bastion of segregation that was the American South of his day, but the monstrously complex racial barriers of the urban North, a hateful FBI crusade against him, jealousy on the part of rival leaders and organizations, and finally the Vietnam War and a vengeful President Lyndon Johnson.
King wrote that the Negroes of America had a collective experience, a kind of shared misery that it made them generally more sensitive to the misery of others. Because the American Negro had roots in both the white and black worlds, he had the capacity to bridge them both. Thus, Black Americans could be the nation's best leaders, providing a new soul force for all Americans, a new expression of the American dream that need not be realized at the expense of other men around the world, but a dream of opportunity and life that can be shared with the rest of the world.
In 1961, protesters in Albany, Georgia demonstrated against discrimination. They were arrested despite following the principle of nonviolence preached by Martin Luther King Jr. In Washington on August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. made his famous plea for freedom and equality.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Recollecting his time at Crozier Theological Seminary, Reverend King wrote, "I was able to strengthen my spiritual life through communing with nature. I made it a practice to go out to the edge of the campus every afternoon for at least an hour to commune with nature. In this experience, I saw God. I saw him in the birds of the air, the leaves of the tree, the movement of the rippling waves, and at night, I would look up at the stars. There is God."
Every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of a creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. This is a judgment. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?
Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love.
Dr. King goes on to say, one who won't die for something is not fit to live.
Dr. King's response to the constant threats on his life could be summed up in this response: I have a job to do. If I were constantly worried about death, I couldn't function. This cause is so right, so moral, that if I should lose my life, in some way, it would aid the cause.
Freedom is never given voluntarily by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Freedom has always been an expensive thing. History is fit testimony to the fact that freedom is rarely gained without sacrifice and self-denial.
From a speech in 1950, which he entitled The Birth of a New Age, Dr. King demonstrated early in his life that his vision of our times went far beyond the civil rights movement and far beyond America's borders. Here are some quotations from that speech.
We, in the 20th century, are living in an age in which a new world order is being born. I am aware of the fact that there are those who would argue that we are going backwards instead of forward, but the present tension represents the necessary pains that accompany the birth of anything new. We now see the new order of integration emerging on the horizon, but we cannot be complacent. The old order will not die without an effort and without working against it. We are familiar with this old order that is dying. We have lived with it in the form of colonialism and imperialism. Most of the people of this world are colored, and most have lived under this yoke. China, Indonesia, India, Pakistan, and Africa.
When the dawn breaks and in the morning sends the sun high in the sky, who would hide from heaven's glory? Who would pass the challenge by? La 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 la.
There's a morning for every nation when the sun's high in the sky. There's a time for every people to affirm their destiny. La 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 la. La 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 la.
Even so, all of us together can create a better land. Leave the past, a new tomorrow waits for all who understand. There's a morning for every nation when the sun's high in the sky. There's a time for every people to affirm their destiny. La 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 la. La 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 la. Even so, all of us together can create a better land. Leave the past, a new tomorrow waits for all who understand. La 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 la. Leave the past, a new tomorrow waits for all who understand.
From a speech in 1950, which I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong spot, describing the first test of his leadership, the bus boycott of Montgomery, Alabama in 1956, Dr. King declared in his speech that night to an overflowing and tense crowd.
We are here because we are American citizens, and we are determined to apply our citizenship to the fullness of its meaning. There comes a time when people get tired of being trampled over by the iron feet of oppression. And we are not wrong in what we're doing. If we are wrong, the Constitution of the United States is wrong. If we are wrong, God Almighty is wrong. If we are wrong, Jesus of Nazareth was a utopian dreamer. But let us be Christian in all our actions. Love is one of the pivotal points of the Christian faith. But standing beside love is always justice.
The non-violent approach does not immediately change the heart of the oppressor. It first does something to the hearts and souls of those committed to it. It gives them new self-respect. It calls up resources of strength and courage they did not know they had. Finally, it reaches the oppressor and so stirs his consciousness that reconciliation becomes a reality.
Walk like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone.
Follow your dream, though it lead to worlds unknown. Life's but a shadow, once our dreams have flown. What if they cry, your dream is not our own? Your soul knows the answer, go on alone.
Give life your heart, bless everything that's grown. Fear not the loving, all this world's your own. Make rich the soil, but once the seed is sown, seek freedom, don't linger, go on alone. Walk like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone. Go on alone. Go on alone.
By 1967 to 1968, despite declining popularity at home and discouraging setbacks, he stood as a global champion of love and nonviolence in a world racked by war and plagued by hate. Regardless of his own shattered dreams, he insisted to the very end that he was still an optimist, that he still believed that one day all of God's children would live together in a symphony of brotherhood.
In 1966, after Dr. King announced his opposition to the war in Vietnam, he encountered further opposition from within the civil rights movement, and now also from the US government. The last years of his life paralleled those of Mahatma Gandhi, in that each man experienced deep discouragement and disappointment as a tide of rising violence threatened not only their work, but in the end, their lives. But what Dr. King said of Gandhi was prophetically applied to him as well. The man who shot Gandhi only shot him into the hearts of humanity.
In those distressing final months, Dr. King was a remarkable movement with revolutionary overtones, a movement whose origins and objectives until now have never been fully realized. His speeches and sermons were widely published, and his books on nonviolence were translated into 15 languages including 3 languages of India. King liked to ruminate on the fertile cross-pollination of ideas that engendered the philosophy of nonviolence to which he had committed his life. Thoreau had been inspired by sacred Hindu writings and teachings, Gandhi in turn by Thoreau, and King and his colleagues by both of them.
Shattered dreams are a hallmark of our mortal existence. Few, if any of us, live to see our fondest hopes fulfilled. If you are cut down in a movement that is designed to save the soul of a nation, then no other death could be more redemptive. We must somehow believe that unearned suffering is redemptive.
In an excerpt from a speech entitled Beyond Vietnam, April 4th, 1967, 1 year to the day before his assassination, Dr. King stated,
"This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all mankind. This oft-misunderstood, this oft-misinterpreted concept has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of man.
I've shared the days of sunshine, gone with them in the rain.
The fires that evening said we were brothers. The fires that evening said we were brothers. A soldier I saw weeping beside a dying friend.
My officers had said I must heal to the end.
But seeing his grief, I knew we were brothers. But seeing his grief, I knew we were
A man sat on the doorstep to see the children play. The gentle way he smiled there would charm your fears away. A stranger he, but love made us brothers. A stranger he, but love made us brothers.
One day I climbed a mountain with friends of other lands.
The words we used were different, but joy would understand.
Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. The words and customs vary like waves upon the sea. One life beneath the surface binds everyone to me. Who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. Who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. And brothers, why endeavor to set ourselves apart? The fences we've been building squeeze tight upon our hearts. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers. Come sing the truth that all men are
a recorded excerpt of the concluding words of Dr. King's last public speech. It was given April 3rd, 1968, the night before his assassination. The circumstances surrounding his visit to Memphis that day were not encouraging, either for his personal safety or for his life's work. Dr. King spent some of that afternoon alone in prayer. By all accounts, it appears that he had a profound spiritual experience. Like the prophets of old, the words you will hear are scriptural in their power, and like rays of light from the sun, extend outward in glory to bless all who receive their warmth. For those who understand the heights of this vision of truth, the image of the mountaintop goes beyond the goal of racial equality. It extends upward to oneness with God and all life. The power of his words will endure and inspire generations to come.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
lives within us, light that all strife reconciles.
We'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. And I think when you entered here, you were given some little coupons, and you're welcome to stay. The staff will keep things open until you're done wandering through the store. And we also wanted to let you know that tomorrow night we start a 3-month Raja Yoga course here in the store. It's our most popular and most comprehensive course on yoga and meditation, taught by this gentleman right here. It's hard to talk at the end of a program like this. It was deeply moving to hear, especially Dr. King's words at the end there. So take them in your heart, live it. God bless you.